Weeping may spend the night, but joy always comes in the morning. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I asked two of you yesterday what joy was. Without hesitation, each separately said, joy is dish soap. Dish detergent. Clearly, I have my work cut out for me this morning. But I don't plan on talking about doing the dishes. We're going to use paper for the picnic. I want to talk to you this morning about joy. I want to talk to you about joy because I struggled with the readings this week. We chose happy, clappy, uplifting music, and then these readings didn't do a whole lot for me. I still have issue with these stories about Elijah and Jesus bringing these two sons of widows back to life. The first, perhaps, was still warm. He was still in his mother's arms. Elijah laid on top of him, perhaps some ancient method of CPR. I can go with that. But the other one was dead, on his way to the grave dead. And Jesus says, do not weep. Not a good pastoral response, Jesus. And he tells the man to get up, and he does, and scares everyone else almost to their own deaths. There is no denying the power of miracles. I believe in them, and in the power of prayer, and in unexpected healing stories, unexplained healing stories. I've witnessed all of them, like many of you have, but I have never witnessed anyone literally bringing anyone back from the dead. I have trouble with these stories because Jesus doesn't bring everyone back from the dead, just a few. And all of these people conceivably die again, since none of us have met them, right? And there is grief again. So what is the point, Jesus? And I know plenty of people, many of us, if not all of us in this room, who have lost loved ones, some after long illnesses, and there was a sense of relief and peace. But some have prayed for miracles and fought the battles of diseases valiantly, or done all they could to prevent tragedies or accidents, and yet they are dead. What about them, Jesus? Well, that is the question I probably won't find the answer to in this life. The psalmist never got any answer either. Those great people singing the songs that we identify with had all the same questions we do. They experienced all the same emotions we do, which is probably why we love them so much. They had been held captive, they were hungry, they were thirsty, they wandered through the desert. They had been ridiculed and tormented by their enemies, whom they knew all too well. And yet this morning we get Psalm 30. Even in the midst of the sink full of dirty dishes we call life, I will sing with joy, says the psalmist. How in the world, how in the midst of our world, do we as a community sing for joy? That is the question. Now, some of us, when I start talking about joy, said, well, joy is happiness. Sometimes, yes, we are happy when we are joyful. I agree, if all things are aligned. But happiness is based on happenings, meaning if things happen to go well, you're happy. But if it happens that something bad occurs, your happiness is likely gone, right? Studies have found that acquiring money or the house or the car do not affect happiness levels as much as we would expect. Many different types of researchers have studied those who win the lottery and have found after a year that people who have won are no happier than those who didn't win. This phenomenon, according to this psychologist I read, and granted she's from California, so take it for what it's worth, calls this hedonistic adaptation and suggests that everyone has a baseline level of the happiness emotion. The effects of happiness are temporary, and people tend to revert to their baseline level of happiness after they've received something materialistic in nature. Those baseline levels vary according to what they say, genetics, as shown by researchers who studied the different temperaments of babies. As Christians, though, joy, not happiness, is our baseline. As my husband said yesterday talking about this, joy is our default setting. I like that from the engineer computer guy. Joy is our default setting. We were created out of God's joy, and nothing and no one can take it from us. This joy does not come from anyone but God. It is our corner on the market. According to the Gospel of John, remember, Jesus told the disciples right before he left them that I've done all these things, I've shown you all these things, I've taught you all this stuff, so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full, like cup overflowing full of joy. Jesus promises them this. Jesus went to the cross to make sure that joy would be complete. And then he reassures them that it's never going to go away. It is this permanent possession, not a fleeting moment like happiness. Jesus says, today you might be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn to joy, even though it is still today. Even when we encounter trials, James says later, count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. Count it all joy. I think this is our challenge as believers today. How can we go about our lives and conduct our relationships in our default setting of joy, even when we're not happy, and especially when those around us are not happy, much less joyful? So this same California psychologist, I know I'm on this verge of going into a self-help sermon, so just go with me, but I needed these bullet points this week, and so I'm going to share them with you. Some of them are no-brainers, but I know, knowing all of you, that we all need to be reminded of these things too. The first one, she says, is choose to smile. Duh. Good. Smile. Meditate and pray. Yeah. Positive thinking. Regardless of the problem or circumstance, you get to choose how you react, how you think. Practice gratitude. When you think about the joyful people you know in your life, they're always grateful people. Notice your surroundings. That's biblical too. Consider the lilies of the field. Smell roses. Become active and support a cause you believe is worthy. Becoming active on a small scale, practice random acts of kindness we talked about in our Bible study on Wednesday. Another no-brainer, right? But it makes you return to that default setting of joy when you buy a bag of food that you know is going to someone who needs it. These are some of the things I think we can do as Christians, as people, as citizens, to show the joy of God. It is what people are really hungry for out there, the ones who haven't heard the story of the good news yet. They think they are looking for happiness and they go for those quick fixes. But it is this joy that we know so well that they are really looking for. There is evidence that suggests that having a religious belief helps people cope with the stresses and strains of life. No one is happy all the time, but some are more content and at peace. Rick Warren is a famous preacher and author. You may have read his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and his wife, Kay, is now writing books, and they've been through a lot together. Their son took his own life several years ago. And so she's written this book called Choose Joy Because Happiness Isn't Enough. She says we tend to think that life comes in these hills and valleys. In reality, it's much more like train tracks, she says. Every day of our life, good things happen that bring pleasure and contentment and beauty. At the same time, painful things happen, right? Those who love you disappoint you or hurt you. They bring sorrow. But these two tracks, joy and sorrow, run parallel to each other. It's why when you're in the midst of something amazing, you have a nagging realization that it's not perfect. And while you're experiencing something painful, that there's this glorious realization that there's still beauty and loveliness in the world. They are inseparable. And if you look down train tracks into the brightness of the horizon, the tracks become what? One. You can't distinguish between the two tracks. It's how it will be for us too one day. Our parallel tracks of joy and sorrow merge into one. The day we meet Jesus in person, face to face, seeing the brightness of who he is. So I'll close with one story about one of our Episcopal parishioners who hasn't been here since we've come together. Flora is her name, and Flora is quite an individual, but as I kept thinking about Joy this week, her face kept popping up because number one, she has this smile that is infectious. But Flora has been through lots of hills and valleys in her life. She is bipolar. She's went through a sad divorce. She's estranged from her children and has very little to live on. And is in a nursing home, as it were, having been a survivor of breast cancer, and she's also diabetic. And so she has a lot of reasons to feel down a lot of the time. But she is a joyful person. It exudes from her. And so when I go to see her, sometimes she is in a funk as I describe it, and so I keep talking and get her telling stories, and we pray together, and we talk about what she's grateful for, and her friends there to notice the beauty of life and remind her of all that there is. But the one thing that always brings her out as we finally break bread together is when I tell her that she is part of this community. That the bread that we break there is the same that comes from this table. It is the other piece that brings us joy, that we are not in it alone. That psalmist, that widows, that disciples has all been through it together as part of this circle that we call life. That we are now on this journey with them, and that there are other voices that are coming up behind us, crying out with joy, with fear, but that we also are part of this circle that will not be broken. And so we are called, I think, to smile and pray, to think positively, to practice gratitude, to show others the beauty that is right before us, to remind them and to invite them to join us in this circle that cannot be broken. And that's how we're going to get to the sermon hymn. I'm learning about this whole Lutheran thing. And that, once you've chosen the sermon hymn, you need to kind of get to it. And so that's our sermon hymn today. Let that circle be unbroken. Of all of us who have been on that journey of joy and sorrow, that we may go forth from this place and invite others to share it with us. Amen. Let's sing.